sitting, I'm not talking about Ukraine and Russia, for the whole world to sit back and seek for the discussion with the Russian Federation. And for Ukraine, of course, the victory, the larger discourse could be based on the reconstruction, which is the baseline for which is the EU membership, Ukraine membership in European Union, and making Ukraine stronger, but also becoming the member state of NATO, which is so obvious and will be very much obvious when Ukraine is back to the borders of its territory. And security guarantees we're now advocating for are in place, which will allow us not to get the military support to defend ourselves, but to make sure that we are secured even when the war is over, to prevent another one.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm round of applause for all three ministers. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. Don't go away. There's much more to come in this room. In fact, what we were just discussing is what the topic of the next panel is going to be. I'll be back in just a moment to introduce that. Stay with us if you can. Thank you. So, hello again. I wasn't gone very long. I'm glad to see that many of you are still here. I know that after something that heady, something that intense that we just the discussion we just had, it's important to first reflect. But we're going to take this discussion to another level, because we have a high-level conversation coming up right now in this room, exploring the implications of Russia's war in Ukraine and what it means for the EU's internal security. It's my great pleasure to introduce a journalist, a fellow journalist whose work I read regularly in Berlin, Christoph von Marschall, the chief diplomatic correspondent of the German daily newspaper Der Tagesspiegel.
Yeah, and it's my great pleasure to welcome here Ylva Johansson on the stage, the European Commissioner for Home Affairs. And what we will do now, we try to think ahead a little bit. Of course, the war, the impact of the war is mainly on the citizens of Ukraine, and the citizens of the European Union are not the target of immediate fighting, but they feel the secondary consequences like energy prices, like inflation. The national conversation generally has changed. And now we would like to take a broader perspective and assess the short and long-term threats and how the EU can respond to it. And we would start just to make a list. Commissioner, what is mainly on your mind when you are thinking about the threats and consequences for home security inside the European Union?
Well, we have to recognize that the big threat is Putin. This is the biggest threat towards us. Of course, now he's invading Ukraine. He wants to destroy Ukraine totally. He wants to destroy the Ukrainians, but he is also destroying the international global order. And he wants to destroy the European Union. We should not be naive. This is actually his goal. So this is the biggest threat, and that means that the most important thing that we need to do in the European Union is to make sure that he will not win. So we have to stay united, and we have to be very strong, and we have to make sure that he will not win. because that will really be the big threat towards us. So this is the overall thing, and that means that we have to deal with, he's using energy as a weapon, he's trying to divide us, he's trying to put a false narrative and propaganda on what causes these high energy prices. So this is the biggest thing. But then, of course, we also have to deal with other things, like we have more than 4 million Ukrainian refugees. They are not a threat towards the internal security, but of course it's a challenge to deal with this. We have to deal with the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, and I think we all think about it right now after the attacks on the Nord Stream pipelines. We need to be much more resilient, be much more aware of the huge risk that the critical infrastructure is posing on us, and we need to do more. And that was also clear from the speech from President von der Leyen today in Parliament. We need to recognize that a war is, of course, a catastrophe for citizens, but it's an opportunity for criminals. We will see organized criminal groups using this opportunity, trafficking weapons, trafficking people, trying to lure women and children, refugees, into trafficking, using them for sexual purposes or other purposes. They will try to traffic drugs. This, of course, we have to stay very vigilant on this topic. And the last thing I would say is that this is really an area where we need also to better protect our external borders. And this is, of course, something that we are already doing, but staying vigilant on how to protect our external borders is also important.
So we have a list of these things like critical infrastructure, like new opportunities for organized crime, human trafficking, firearms and drugs. So what can the EU do about it? Because often it's a mixed responsibility. It's not everything in the field of the European Union or the Commission. Sometimes you need to cooperate with member states. Then it's a question, for example, the critical infrastructure, is that more a military challenge or is it a civil challenge? So let's go through those points. Let's start with the critical infrastructure, because it's on all of our minds. We just have seen how easily it can be attacked. And what can we do to protect this critical infrastructure?
We can do much more, and actually the Commission proposed almost 2 years ago a new legislation to protect our critical infrastructure in the European Union. And actually just before the summer, the co-legislators agreed on this new legislation that will now be implemented. And for example, what we put in the legislation is that member states are not only obliged, today they are obliged to take into account 2 different areas, transport hubs and energy sector. Now we are broadening the scope to 11 sectors, like fresh water, food supply, a lot of other areas, cybersecurity, and also the steps that member states need to take. Why is this important on the European level? It's because that many of those critical entities are not only critical for one member state. If they are being destroyed, they have devastating consequences for many member states. And also that's why it's also important to make sure that we can restore as quick as possible. So we have a new legislation in place, and that member states and Parliament has been very happy to adopt, actually. So they see the need for a European approach here.
So we have a lot of social and economic pressure because people are economically more vulnerable, and you said that is an opportunity for organized crime. So how can we counter that? Of course, the easiest would say, well, let's make sure that no household has less money than before. Of course, that's not feasible. So what are the options to counter this kind of threat?
Yeah, we need to see that it's the organized criminal groups that are really using this. And the organized criminal groups, they are more and more professional. They are more and more international, and they are more and more violent. We see now that they are organized more or less like international, multinational business companies. And that's why we need more of police cooperation. So each member state, the police is doing a great job, but they can only see part of it, because most of those have links to other member states. And that's why the police cooperation is at the core. And that's why Europol is at the core. So we have recently now have a new mandate for Europol with bigger possibilities. also, for example, to develop artificial intelligence to deal with information, like, for example, you probably know about the Encrochat case, the Sky ECC, the Anom, where we had a lot of information on how these organized criminal groups works, but all these messages cannot be read by a policeman, a policewoman. It has to be dealt with by artificial intelligence. It has to be dealt with together. We also know from this information that they very often target, they're using corruption. 60% of the organized criminal groups think that corruption is the best way to reach their target and their goals. And that means also that how we're building the resilience towards anti-corruption is really part of fighting the organized crime. But the short answer to your question is better police cooperation, quicker channels for the exchange of information, and a stronger role for Europol.
You made a very interesting remark about refugees. Of course, the war caused a lot, millions of refugees, and especially in this country, Poland. Poland has taken in a lot of refugees from Ukraine. But then you said, you know, that's not a threat, that is a challenge. And of course, we understand what you are saying, but we have had conflicts before where we would have said, no, wait a minute, refugees can be a threat. When we had this mass of refugees from wars like in Iraq and Syria, of course there was this concern that it might also be an opportunity to smuggle in people who will be a threat for internal security. Has that changed? Is the structure of the war in Ukraine and the refugees which are coming so different from the refugees which were coming from Iraq, from Syria, and so on?
No, but we are much better prepared. I think this is important to see. The European Union is much better prepared to deal with a big refugee crisis. We are now facing the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War. And of course it's a challenge, but actually we are managing. And of course some member states are taking bigger responsibilities than others. The country with the highest number of Ukrainian refugees per capita is the Czech Republic. Second is Poland. Third is Lithuania. So these are our countries that really are taking a big, but we are dealing with this. And on this security thing, from the day one, we really reached out to the member states at the borders to make sure that they do the security check, even though it's difficult when so many people come, but they did. They did a security check on everybody entering into the European Union, and we sent support from Frontex, from Europol, to help with the second line and the third line of security checks. And yes, we found some people that try to use the opportunity to sneak into the European Union that are dangerous or potentially dangerous. But the borders worked. Actually, in this, the welcoming was huge and heartwarming, but the security checks were also there, and they worked.
So, of course, I have to ask, when you're talking about refugees, and it's a normal complaint that the EU member states haven't come to an agreement how to distribute refugees between them. Is that, how do I say that? Is that more an artificial complaint, or has it practical consequences when you said, you know, it works? Countries are taking in these refugees. It's not that they are refugees which they are not taken care of. So does it have to be the European Union? Do we need this agreement? Or can we say, if something is working, don't complain too much about the parts which could be better but are not really an obstacle?
Both yes and no. You know, when I was appointed commissioner, it's almost 3 years ago, and the main topic that I was given by Ursula von der Leyen was, you have to unblock the blocked situation on migration. And that has been my main topic. Because migration is something normal. Migration will always happen. Yeah? And our task is to manage migration in an orderly way, and we do that better together, and we do it also better together with third countries. And I've been working on this. And I mean, we are in a much better situation now. So now I have presented a new pact on migration and asylum, and it's being adopted step by step. And member states have a very constructive approach, and Parliament as well. And I think that was, we are dealing with, I should say, we're dealing with migration in a normal way. It's, if I can put it like, my aim was to make migration a normal, boring EU topic, to say that we should, I mean, member states have different opinions in many aspects not only on migration, but most of the things we are dealing with in the European Union. And then, you know, we deal with it, Commission make proposal, member states make amendments, and they make compromises, and Parliament make compromises, and then we find an agreement that is maybe not perfect, but quite good. Yeah, and that's how we now are dealing with migration as well. So we are adopting part step by step, and that is going well. They make no headlines because we are actually adopting it. So it's not like, you know, the big conflict. And I think that was, it's a long answer, but I think that was the reason behind that it was possible this time to activate the Temporary Protection Directive. In my view, that should have been activated in the migration crisis in 2015, but the political situation was not there. This time, we had worked very hard to find a better understanding between member states, a better if not a consensus, but a better understanding on different views and different realities. And when I proposed to activate this directive for the first time ever in the Union, we had a unanimous decision 1 week after the war started. I think this was great, and this was really showing that we can deal also with very difficult issues together. And when we do that, we can be real proud of each other, and then we can manage things and challenges that are bigger than we thought we could deal with.
You were talking about migration, now we are talking about refugees, and of course the world would be much easier if it would be such a black and white thing. This is one thing, that's the other thing, and of course it is mixed, and it can also develop over time. So it is quite clear at the beginning of the war, people are fleeing the fighting in Ukraine, and they need, of course, a place they can go. But then comes the second chance, or this second part of the whole game, and they will be needed in Ukraine to rebuild the country. So what are your thoughts about handling that? To which degree could we also say that, you know, there's a time when you need help, and there's a time when the country, but all of Europe, needs some people to go back in order not to cause a brain drain, which might be the obstacle for rebuilding those parts of the country which are not under war anymore?
People are going back right now. Quite a number of the Ukrainian refugees are going back right now. I was in Kiev 2 months ago, and I met with several of women that has been fleeing to the EU, and now was back in Ukraine, back in Kiev, rebuilding the country, going back to work, being part of the resilience, being part of the fight. So a lot of people are going back to Ukraine right now. And I think it's important with our message, go back. If things get worse, you are welcome back to the EU again. So this is actually happening right now. Then it's important to say that the Temporary Protection Directive is a temporary protection. So it will last until March 2024. So it's not a forever protection. Hopefully the war had ended and Putin is defeated then. But if not, then we have to have other solutions, because this solution has a limit in time.
You mentioned one more challenge, obstacle, however, and that is our borders, the external borders of the European Union. And again, it's a mixed responsibility. It is in the responsibility of member states at the external, but we have also Frontex, the agency, which is an EU agency. So you said that has improved enormously, but in the Mediterranean, for example, we still see a lot of problems which are not managed well or to a degree satisfactory. So what can be done to secure these borders, these external borders better? And is this mixed responsibility really an obstacle in practice? To which degree is it? What are your thoughts on that?
No, it's not an obstacle at all. We are now developing the integrated border management, which will be the most modern border management in the world, actually. So we are rolling out the coming years a very much higher ambition when it comes to the digitalization of our protection of the external borders. We will have much more information on everybody that will enter into the European Union, and Frontex is being building up and are working with more and more member states. So I really see a lot of progress in this area. But we also need to look at our partner countries. So, for example, a few weeks after the war started, the Moldovan Minister of Interior called me, Anna Revenko, and she said, "Help! I can't protect my borders. I don't have the people. Can you send Frontex here?" Because that was how the criminals used that border, because it was a weaker one than towards the European Union. And then I said, oh no, negotiating an international agreement with Frontex takes usually 1 to 2 years in negotiations. And before that, we are not allowed to send border guards to a third country. But I said, okay, let's try. We finalized the agreement and the negotiation in 2 weeks. And the same day as I signed the agreement, Frontex border guards were actually coming to the borders, and they are doing a great job right now helping Moldova at their external borders. So this is also important, how we work with weaker part, to say, that is also outside the European Union.
We have just 1 minute left, but I would like to raise an issue you started with. The biggest danger or threat at all is Putin, him in itself. He is trying to undermine us. He is trying to undermine the cohesion. And he is using tools like propaganda. So what is the best countering option for the European Union to counter this kind of propaganda that raises doubts in us, whether this is our war to fight, whether we should suffer inflation-wise, energy, and so on and so on. So what is your advice in that direction?
We have to fight this in many aspects, I must say. I was just having before this conversation with Google, and I think that the tech companies are important here, what they can do to counter disinformation and propaganda, but also that we need to have we are democracies. That makes, of course, that when people are having another opinion than the government, that makes sense that it could make the government lose, yeah? And that's how it should be. But that means also that we have to have a very broad democratic debate, and we have to speak out on the role of Putin. And I'm a little bit afraid that sometimes we are focusing too narrow on the problems that we are having, and exactly close to me, like my high energy prices and other problems, the inflation. But we have to have a broader view to see what is causing this, and what is the biggest threat. What is the biggest threat towards the energy supplies in the long term? What is the biggest threat towards the internal security in the European Union in the long term? So we really need to see where the real threat comes from, and we have to fight it together. So I think so far we have been much more united, much stronger than Putin thought that we should be. We surprised him, and we surprised ourselves a bit. And I think that we should continue to surprise ourselves, to show, because when we are united, we can do so much more than we think that we can do, actually. We can achieve so much more, and this is really what's at stake right now.
That would be psychological resilience of the whole society. Please join me in thanking the Commissioner Ylva Johansson, and I wish you a successful day. Thanks.
Thank you very much. A timely message for where we are right now, that united we can create and achieve much more than we imagine, that let's continue to surprise ourselves. Well, we've got a couple of surprises coming up this afternoon. I know I might have surprised you by moderating that one panel session. You might have been expecting someone else. If you were using your paper program, we don't update everything all the time, but online on our app, you should probably see what's going on there quite well. Now, our next session is on a topic that's getting a lot of traction at the Warsaw Security Forum, and that is designing Ukraine's recovery in the spirit of the Marshall Plan. And for that, we have with us a very special moderator. Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff is Vice President and Executive Director of the Berlin office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. The stage is yours.
Good afternoon. Eventually, this war will end. And on the day after, we need a plan to reconstruct Ukraine and a plan to help Ukraine reconstruct. Now, some people say, why worry about this now? Aren't there other priorities? Isn't there a war to conduct and to win? Isn't there an ailing country to be kept afloat? To that I would say, yes, that is true. But remember, you can win a war and lose the peace. And remembering World War II, the post-war planning started in 1942. So reconstruction planning, in fact, has started in July in Lugano. The first international reconstruction conference took place, and Ukraine, in fact, presented its national recovery plan there. Problem was the Western donor countries did not present a plan. 3 weeks from now, there is another such conference, an expert conference hosted by the German government and the European Commission in Berlin. And again, we're not at the point where such a comprehensive plan is to be expected from the Western donor country side. Now, there is one such plan, and it is this. It is not, I admit, a government plan. It is not an EU plan. It's just a think tank paper, but it is the first of its sort. It's the first comprehensive attempt to look at the challenges of reconstruction from a donor country perspective. It's a framework to think about. Now, there are a number of thorny questions connected with reconstruction and with helping Ukraine reconstruct. First, who should pay? How should we organize burden sharing? Who should lead? Which institutions to use or to build? When to start? During the war, after the war, regional differences? How best to enable investments? What to do with Russia's frozen assets? How to ensure accountability and avoid corruption in a country that has a history thereof, and how best to involve civil society. Now, the Berlin conference in 3 weeks will focus on 2 of these questions, on governance and on finance. So I will concentrate in the minutes I have with you on these 2, acknowledging that important pieces, especially the accountability piece, that is very important, especially for Western donors, needs to be left out here. Now there is a shorthand we've come to use for Ukrainian reconstruction assistance, and that is the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, a modern Marshall Plan for Ukraine. And indeed, the Marshall Plan is a parallelism, is an inspiration for the ambition that is necessary for this task. But what it is not is a blueprint. And I'll tell you why. I'd actually call what we need now an inverse Marshall Plan. And why is that? In 1947, one country was helping many. Now it's many countries helping one. In 1947, there were no institutions, also no aid institutions. Now we have a full spectrum of institutions available, which is why donor coordination will be the key governance challenge and the key construction challenge, I should say, of this endeavor. Which is why we suggest in this report that we should not build new institutions, but adapt the existing institutions to the task. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's not waste time on the design of new stuff. This will be a monumental undertaking. It will be large. A big coalition is going to be needed to finance this. This is why it needs strong leadership. And the leadership necessary for such a task, we feel, needs an institutional anchor. And that institutional anchor should be the G7. As a group of like-minded nations that can build a coalition, let's say G7 plus larger than the G7 itself. And it needs leadership, if you will, Mr. or Mrs. Marshall. We think the initial coordinator of such an endeavor should be an American of global standing. Why an American? Because the international coalition that needs to be constructed needs to reach far beyond Europe, and America has shown to be able to build such global coalitions. Also think about the fact that such a coordinator needs to convince, cajole, and coordinate. That's what this American of global stature, we hope, can do. It is also because it is not self-evident that the United States would be part of such an effort. It needs to be drawn in. There is a conversation on Capitol Hill that says, well, we've invested so much into arms, into the security of Ukraine, why don't you Europeans do the reconstruction? We actually think that's a recipe for disaster in transatlantic affairs, because the finger pointing will start immediately. You're doing this wrong, and the other side is doing the other wrong. We actually need a compact in which we acknowledge the nexus between security and recovery, and both sides need to keep engaged in both. The second big piece of this coalition that will need to work with Ukraine is the European Union, because Ukraine, the final goal of recovery for Ukraine will be European integration. So the EU is a non-enumerated member of the G7, so it already sits at the table, and that recovery coordinator that we need can draw on the European Union, on the European Commission, on a task force hosted there to get the work done. Now, the financials of this are large, but at this point unknowable. There are different estimates ranging from the destruction at 120 to several hundred billion. Now, those are large numbers, but when you look at them, don't let yourself be convinced that this is not doable. It is. It's going to be stretched out over many years, covered by a number of countries, different institutions, and different financial tools to be applied to this task. When you break it down, it does become realistic and doable. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. And it's not easy because the most important thing that is necessary for this is grants. Grants to start early, to be flexible, and not to overburden Ukraine with debt to make it debt insustainable, which would be another disaster. So the gold standard is grants, and that's Western taxpayer money. Now, the debate has not started, and it needs to get started, how the EU wants to finance the European part of the reconstruction aid. I can see 4 options on those, and when I enumerate these 4 options, I will see many rolling eyes. And I'll read them to you. First, collect national contributions, pledging. Secondly, reopen the multi-annual financial framework. Third, another COVID-type relief fund, Next Gen EU. Fourth, introduce common bonds. None of these options are appealing. That is why we don't hear anything about it, because there is a game of duck and cover. Nobody wants to come out with this first. But if no politician has the courage to open this debate in Europe, then others beyond Europe will not commit either, because they'll say, if Europe doesn't move first and doesn't commit, after all, Ukraine is a European country, we won't. So therefore, this is a thorny debate, has a lot of overlay of other issues, but it needs to start now. No amount of government money can reconstruct a country like Ukraine. Ukraine needs to become investable, and investors will tell you what they need is peace and predictability. What if we don't get peace immediately, or some intermediate stage that we can't really call peace? Well, for that, we need something that we call war insurance to help reduce the risk of private investments, and such risk can only be reduced by sovereigns. This is a sovereign task, and it hasn't yet been done. It needs to be constructed. Then finally, my final point, Russian assets. I think we need to tell Russia that they will never see these frozen assets again. But freezing assets is not seizing assets. There is a legal and a political gulf between the two of them. We actually, in studying this issue, found that we don't expect Russian assets to be usable and used anytime soon. Also because of the impact on the international financial system and the precedents this would set. But what you can do is use the frozen assets for leveraged financial products, where they produce interest, and they can become a reparations element or reparations replacement in whatever settlement there might be. So there's different ways to use that money, but it is not a straightforward, quick seizure of those funds. So in summing up, Ukrainian recovery is a massive undertaking for Western donor countries. It is doable, and it needs to start now. And reconstruction planning, that is my last sentence, shall not be a fig leaf. A fig leaf for all those who don't want to do what is necessary now. And what is necessary now is to keep an ailing country afloat and help it to end this war soon. Thank you.
So, recovery for Ukraine. It's good to be planning for that, as we just heard. But first, of course, the war must be won. Russia must be pushed back to the previous borders, and Ukraine's territorial integrity must be restored. Now, we're not going to, in our next session, we're not going to go too far from Ukraine. In fact, we're going to stay on the shores of Ukraine. We're going to be looking at what's happening there. It's been the focus of a great deal of news reporting. I'm a newsman, I'm a television news anchor, and have been dealing with this subject a great deal ourselves. Everyone is watching what is happening in the Black Sea. It's militarily significant, but it's also significant for the food supply, the world food supply. So there's a lot at stake in that region, and not just food, much else as well. So we have a panel discussion coming up right now on the future of the Black Sea region. The moderator is Piotr Marciniak. I invite him to the stage now.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? I think everything is right. It's high time to start. We have a delay, I'm afraid. Are you tired by the long discussions? It looks like a tough day. Tough times, I could say also. My name is Piotr Marciniak. I'm the news anchor for the Fox TVN, Poland's most watched television newscast. I also work for TVN24, which is a Polish 24-hour commercial news channel owned by US-based media company Warner Bros. Discovery. Welcome you all to the panel, Future of the Black Sea Region, Complexity of Interest in Times of War. The participants are Brigadier General Remus Bondur, Chief of Strategic Planning Directorate, Defense Staff, Romania. Nice to have you here. Admiral Rob Bauer, Chair of the NATO Military Committee, and Mariana Bazuchla, Deputy Chair, Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, Verkhovna Rada, Parliament of Ukraine. There will be a lot of questions. We have limited time, as always. And I still hope there will be also some time for some additional questions from the audience. So let's hope it will be possible. The first group of questions will be to all of you, but we'll start with the guests from Ukraine. Is Ukraine able to defend Odessa, regain Kherson, the south of the country, and Crimea? How can NATO help Ukraine to achieve this? What if Putin uses tactical nuclear weapons? And do you think Ukraine will be admitted to NATO? And when?
Before this talk, actually, I asked if to answer honestly or positive. Because if we're speaking about the overall possibility of usage of nuclear weapon, we need to be honest that all the steps that were made by Russia before, they cannot be rationalized. Speaking about the middle-term and long-term outcomes they received. So those situations when they actually activated their doctrine of restricted nuclear war and started demonstration politically, and even if we are now speaking about Black Sea region, so about maritime also aspects, they activated one of the greatest submarine in the world, Belgorod, with nuclear capabilities to demonstrate their power. So the overall possibility exists. So, and the question is, having this possibility now, how it can be used. According to the doctrine, it can be used as even a demonstration without big destructive outcomes, but to demonstrate the overall usage of this nuclear weapon. And the question is only and firstly how NATO and world will react, because the main aim of the main possible aim of such usage would not be to make the destruction, but to seize their reaction, to cross one more red line. And the overall reaction will define the future of the world order, really. But where, of course, it's about Ukraine. We are preparing for such scenarios, and also with different variant of execution. So I will not be optimistic, or I will not say that there is no possibility. And now, in different dimensions, political, organizational, our world should prepare to make how to react on this situation. The second moment is about Crimea, and you asked about perspectives of Black Sea region. You know, to say that Black Sea region is unstable, it would be too banal. Now, Black Sea region is a great area of battle. And there are actually, in fact, there are two stakeholders there, and I dare to say it's not Russia and NATO. It's mostly one NATO country which is playing some kind in the middle game. It's Turkey. and they even don't only, I can speak not only about military presence and overall security format, but also about different connected measures as help with transportation of goods. And now even their situation is so tangled that even to transport food became the military operation with diplomatic and military dimensions. I'm speaking about about transportation of our agriculture goods. That firstly, having occupied a lot in Black Sea region, we needed to win the battle for one island, then have a diplomatic process of negotiation with help of Turkey, and then have the possibility to export our agriculture goods. So it's an example that the Black Sea region became so extremely dangerous and so extremely unpredictable that even after the win of Ukraine, it would not be stable for many, many years. And it will be some kind of vacuum of proper order. And we predict that Turkey will be some kind of main player, and of course it depends in what state would be Russia and what the role would be after the overall war conflict we have now. And we know the Montreal doctrine, which prevents to make real enforcement of NATO countries present in Black Sea region. So that's why it's also questionable how NATO can react to enforce the presence, for example, in Romania, in Bulgaria, or just another countries as NATO representatives forces. You had a lot of questions. Maybe I tried to describe the overall environment and threats, and will be happy to answer additional, or if I did not answer it in some.
But tell me something more about the possible reaction of Ukrainian soldiers in case of, if Putin uses nuclear weapons. Are you afraid of this? And what about the NATO's membership? I mean, Ukraine want to be admitted to NATO. What is your opinion? Is it possible or not? Honestly.
Honestly, yes, of course, I'm Ukrainian, and I cannot avoid the wishful thinking component. But comparing even 1.5 year before, now we have far more chances to be the member of NATO, I suppose. Because the Russian invasion, full-scale war, provoked those which they did not expect and they did not want. The two Scandinavian countries which have borders with Russia became NATO members very quickly. And it's one of example when, and what is very important, after they became in the process of gaining NATO membership, after they became NATO members, Russia did not react in that full scale, possible scale that world was expected. So, and it's not only one example. We see that, and as I previously said in another discussion, we see very clear moment, and which was the mistake, I can say, of tens of years. Russia cannot be calmed down. There is no way to calm down aggressor. Every enforcement, every forced action, every demonstration of the power of the democratic vote, the power of decision, the power of NATO has a positive effect on the outcomes and Russian decisions. Every demonstration of step back, every demonstration of some kind of negotiation possibility as a paradox enforce Russian aggressively systemic position because they see it like weakness. And it's the principal moment of the mentality of the state. And it's a principal mistake, the outcome of what is war in Ukraine now. Because in 2000, yes, now we are about Black Sea region. Black Sea region, it's about also Georgia. It's about reaction of NATO and world in 2008. And while having powerful reaction in 2008 with 5–10% of efforts, we would not have all the other steps by Russia. Or at least we would have much less. And this is example, and I try to explain what we have now, the outcomes and perspectives. So enforcement and powerful position is that way out of conflict. In what the last sentence, it can be paradox for European country. European culture, postmodern European culture, and even NATO perspectives. It can be paradox, but it's very understandable by Russia.
The next question is to the guest from Romania. General, how does Romania helps Ukraine? Do you believe in its victory, honestly? And what do you mean by victory in this case? And will the use of nuclear weapons change a lot, or maybe not? What's your opinion?
So, I would start with complexity there. So, we are talking about Black Sea region, where we have the war ongoing, 2 belligerents, 3 NATO member states, 2 partners, the flow of the grains coming from Russia and Ukraine moving out through the straits and spreading around the world. So it's a very complex region moving back to history, cultural differences, religious differences, complexity in relations between states. These have to be taken into consideration. That leads to a conclusion that we need to have a strategy for the Black Sea region, extensive Black Sea region, to discuss very careful what is the future of this region and how we can continue to support our values into this region. This is very important. Now, going back, Russia waged a war of choice. Ukraine waged a war of national survivability. And we, all of us together, the West, we are carrying a battle to support Ukraine, again, to protect our values. Starting from this, I will say that Romania started to support Ukraine to prepare for this war immediately after 2014. We were part of training the Ukrainian troops through the Partnership for Peace. The Ukrainian troops participated in multinational exercises in Romania starting immediately after the intervention, the Russian intervention in Donbass in 2014. So I think we were part of the response of the Ukrainian forces at the beginning of the battle, because I assume that we contributed to the fact that Ukrainian forces were better trained in order to stop the aggression. How we helped Ukraine, I think the most important thing was the way Romania prepared and carried on the migration flow. We've processed about 2.5 million migrants from Ukraine moving out, refugees. Mostly of them were women and children. And it was not only the government, the local authorities, but the simple Romanian citizen that put heart and their fortune and their values into the support of these refugees. For the moment, I think we have about 80,000 still hosted on our territory. They move in between 80,000 to 85,000. There is a change in the figures on a daily basis. Secondly, we offered support in treating heavily wounded soldiers into the military hospitals, and also we provided military support, both lethal and non-lethal, in support of Ukraine. So I think Romania was, together with all the NATO countries and within the NATO and EU policy, in support of NATO. We opened on the EU side a hub, and we've transported all the goods provided by other nations into Ukraine through that hub. So I think the support was from the beginning and will continue until it's necessary. Speaking about the nuclear threat needs to be assessed. We need to think about this. It can happen, and for the moment, I think NATO take into consideration this, and there will be plans in place to respond to such a threat. About the victory, the question that you asked, it's very difficult as a soldier to predict the end of a war, but that battle to support Ukrainians, I think, is critical now, because the Ukrainians, they need to assess what the victory means, and then diminishing the military power of Russia could be a sort of, let's say, support for all of us for the future life. But coming to the end, I come again and I say we need to discuss a strategy for the Black Sea area, extending Black Sea area to include all the complexities that are in that area and what the future looks like for this region.
You've just been talking about defending of the values, but maybe what about security? Where does Romania see threats to its security? Is Russia a threat not only to Ukraine but also to NATO countries in the Black Sea region? And what about the Russian fleet?
Say again the last part, I would say.
What about the Russian fleet? Do you think Russia is a threat not only to Ukraine but also to NATO countries, also to Romania? Are you feel threatened by Russia?
So of course that, you know, through the history, Russians never came with flowers in Romania. And I assume that we need to address within NATO the collective defense, and we have plans in place. And after the Madrid summit, the Black Sea region came up into the strategic concept. We treated Russians as partners for a long time, and we were strategically surprised. From the moment we treated Russians as a threat, we predicted almost with pinpoint accuracy the moment of invasion. And now I think what NATO have done with moving the collective defense battle groups into the southeastern part of the Eastern Front, how I like to say, is a reassurance of the nations. We are working, and we are grateful to France to assume the framework nation collective defense battle group in Romania, and some other nations are willing to support the increase of these, the raise of these battle groups to a brigade level. We also took advantage of the presence of the air assets in Romania to increase the air policing with extensive number of jets, fighter jets. We are keeping, NATO is keeping, let's say, an eye on the Black Sea to see what is going on there. And for the moment, I think the evolution of the situation reassured Romania. This happens also with our neighbors in Bulgaria. So I think now there is a coherence of the deployment of forces. The United States deployed also additional troops in Romania, and for the moment, we are looking to increase this presence and to provide the host nation support in order to NATO to help us with the collective defense.
I will probably ask also about the role of Turkey in the region and about the situation of Georgia. You said about before, but maybe a little later. Admiral, sorry. What are Ukraine's chances of defeating Russia, in your opinion? Do you think that Putin can really use nuclear weapons, or it is a bluff? What will be NATO's response, and will the arrival of radioactive pollution on the territory of the alliance countries will be treated as aggression? That's an important question. And the last question is, does Ukraine have a chance to be admitted to NATO? I know it's a political question mostly, but maybe you have your opinion, military opinion about that. What are the arguments for and what are the arguments against? So let's start with the defeating Russia.
I think it's very important to state that NATO sees Russia as a threat. But at the same time, NATO is not at war with Russia. That's a fact, whether people like it or not, but that's a fact. That's one. Second, with regard to membership of NATO, that is a political question. It has military implications, but I'm not going to talk about how big the chances are. A decision was taken in the Bucharest summit in 2008. It is reiterated in the last Madrid summit, and at the same time, as always, the door remains open. The nations that want to join can say so. They have to live up to certain rules and regulations, and then it is up to the allies and no one else to actually allow that nation to become a member. So that is the procedure. And whether the nations are willing to do that is a political question, first and foremost. So I'm not going to answer that question there. The second one, with regard to is Ukraine able to win this war? I think, as my colleague, the brigadier said, it is very difficult to actually predict anything in a war, because things can change overnight. But if you look at what Ukraine is doing, that is remarkable. And I think if they continue that way and they're able to continue to successfully supply their forces, to maintain their forces, to be re-equipped by the allies and other nations in the world, then I think Ukraine is able to win that war. How long will that take is a completely different question. That depends on many, many things, and so I'm not going to elaborate on that. But I think what changed the situation since 2014 is that NATO and allies helped to train Ukraine forces in a completely different way than they had done before. Ukraine had many similarities to the Russian forces that we see now until 2014. So basically, generals leading the soldiers, no mission command. What does that mean? In NATO, we use that term to actually explain to our soldiers why they fight, what they have to achieve, and then to leave the how to as low a possible level, to leave that to the lowest possible level. So it's not the generals telling the soldiers what to do, how to do it, but only why and what, and then leave the execution of the operation to as low a level as possible. And that's what we see now. After 8 years of that support from NATO and allies, you actually see the success of Ukraine what is happening. Ukraine is extremely successful because the soldiers in the units actually take the initiative while the Russian soldiers are waiting for an answer from Moscow. And then within the answer coming back from Moscow, Ukraine forces have achieved something new, creating a new problem, and therefore they are within the Russian cycle time and time again. That is what is happening at the moment. That is the result of, first and foremost, the Ukrainian courage and determination. Secondly, the help of 50 nations to supply Ukraine with weapons and ammunition and money and other goods that are required to fight a war. But of course also this change in the way they conduct warfare. So I think that is why I believe it is possible that they win this war. Then with regard to nuclear, I understand all the questions. I will not going to answer whether we are prepared. I'm not going to tell you anything in a public forum on what the options are and what we are going to do when what is happening. It's so many so whats that it is not even the radiation question. There's so many factors that will determine the answer. The one thing that has been said many times by the leadership in NATO and in a number of allies is that the response will be such that the Russians will regret what they have done. And I think that is extremely important. And it's not only from a military point of view important, that answer, to make sure that we will respond, but it is also important from the point of view, and I didn't hear that so much today and yesterday, is that the Russians will lose the last support in the world if they use nuclear weapons. I'm convinced of that. Whether that is part of their rational decision-making is something else, but they will have no more friends other than maybe North Korea. So I think it is not a smart thing to do. It is a stupid thing to do. Will it not happen, therefore? No, that is not necessarily the case. I mean, we've seen, as Mariana said, there's many things in this war, in this conflict, that is a surprise to us, and then you have to react to that. But the most important thing is there will be a response.
The next question is to our guests from Ukraine and Romania. What role does Turkey play in the region? Ankara provides Ukraine with drones, as we know, but also lets Russian ships through the Bosphorus. How is the military cooperation between Ukraine and Turkey and between Romania and Turkey? President Erdogan, we know that continues to meet with Putin. Is it an opportunity from your point of view or a problem?
Could you clarify what about opportunity?
Pardon, which part of the question?
Yeah.
I was asking about Turkey, the role in the region, and you know that Erdogan continues to meet with Putin and also to support you with the drones. So are those meetings in Moscow or somewhere else between Erdogan and Putin an opportunity? Well, I think about peace negotiations, for example, or a problem for you.
Okay. Frankly, again, I will try to avoid a lot of talks about and some kind of impressions about external policy making by Turkey. Actually, those positions, they are playing now some kind of in the middle. It's very hard to verify and to say about, because they are NATO country from one side. They have ambition. They are ambitious. They have ambitious to be the first in the Black Sea region. From other side, they are keeping ties with Russia. But anyway, those partnerships that we have in defense industry, in their help in agriculture project, which is, as I previously said, in fact, military operation now, and also that helps that they provide a third example with our military imprisoned military liberated with the help of Erdogan. So it's fact. May I stop on the statement that in fact they are more unpredictable than to comment them. So I just hope that Turkey will find and keep that balance that would be at least acceptable in the, those unacceptable and extreme situation. And of course, if we, whilst having the topic about Black Sea region, it's better to have such leadership by Turkey as a NATO country with the potential more on over cooperation with others than Russian. And so that, that natural play to exclude and to balance Russia is better for everybody. But I need to add about Black Sea region because now it's really, it's like vacuum of security. Even those civilian objects, and you know this, which are in Black Sea region, and also which were Ukrainians, now it's small or more military bases with special equipment. For example, it's different technical issues, and what about gas industry? Everything is used, is took by Russia and used for military purposes. And Crimea, we were cried about this because 2 years, 3 years, 4 years ago that they made Crimea a big atomic submarine, may I say in this way. And to demilitarize Crimea, it's one of the main issues to be sure in Black Sea region.
I'm afraid we need to hurry up, so please let us short answers. I will ask you about the role of Turkey, but also about the security of Moldova, which is your neighborhood. What about the Transnistrian, Naddniestrze problem?
So Turkey respects its status as a NATO member. So we, Romania, have a strategic partnership with Turkey. So nothing to comment on this. So the Montreal Convention, it's a document that completes the laws of the sea. And immediately after the outbreak of the conflict, Turkey closed the straits. And that meant 2 Russian cruisers were not allowed to enter the Black Sea. I think the presence of those 2 cruisers would have changed the naval situation into the Black Sea. So I think like any other countries into NATO, each of the countries follow their national interests. I think Turkey is doing the same. But as a NATO ally and owner of the Montreal Convention, they just put it in practice. So that's all on my side. Talking about Republic of Moldova, indeed we are very, very concerned about the, let's say, the most dangerous course of action when a land bridge can move from Crimea down to Odessa and then in connection with Transnistria would bring the Russian troops very close of Moldova. Moldova needs help to improve their defense system, and within our partnership for peace, we work together with them on this, and I think some other NATO countries should do the same. That's the perspective now from this point. But again, it's crucial, as I mentioned, two partner states, Moldova, Republic of Moldova and Georgia, they need to be supported, even though the pressure is now to support Ukraine in order to increase their military capacity and to be more aligned to our values than to a future occupation.
Admiral, short question about Georgia. I'll not ask you about the possible, I would like to ask you, can Georgia ever be in NATO? But I know that you will not answer this question. So is Georgia safe, in your opinion? And what do you think about Azerbaijan and Armenia conflict?
Georgia is a partner of NATO, like Ukraine, like Armenia and Azerbaijan. And in that way, and all of these nations have done or are having contributions to NATO operations. So in their own way and in the different, and not in all operations, but in some. In that sense, we will remain having that relationship with these nations. We are not part of that conflict. It's maybe a boring answer, but it is important that people make the distinction between the involvement of allies or the alliance. And I am talking on behalf of the alliance. And that means that 13 nations agree to do something or not. It is not the NATO headquarters that decides on its own to do anything against any nation. It is a discussion that we will have, and then when 30 nations want to do something, help a nation as an alliance, we will have to have had that discussion. Because that is difficult, you therefore see that a lot of the allies are helping, most of the allies, or all the allies, are helping Ukraine in different ways, either financially or non-lethal aid or lethal aid. It is not the alliance when it comes to lethal aid. It is with other aid. It is non-lethal aid. There's the assistance package that was decided in Madrid. So there is a combination of what NATO does and what the allies do. And the same applies with our relationship with the partners you were talking about. And in this case, Armenia and Azerbaijan are having a problem together. And that is first and foremost their problem in terms of what they do there and how they, of course we will talk to both nations in terms of if they need any assistance, but we don't want to, again, become part of that conflict. And I think it is important to make that distinction and to understand, because if all these conflicts become a conflict between NATO and other nations, the world is not necessarily a safer place. I mean, we should keep the conflict as long as possible, and it maybe doesn't sound nice, but in Ukraine. Because if it becomes a bigger conflict, we are much further from home. We need to continue to help Ukraine, as we do, on a daily basis. And I saw that with my own eyes in Rzeszów with the Polish Chief of Defense when I visited that place 2 days ago. And that's an impressive operation where NATO allies, where other nations in the world send goods, and that is then being sent to Ukraine. So that is the sort of help where we participate in, that not being a NATO operation, but there is a lot of support from NATO to Ukraine and to our partners.
Well, it's time for Catch the Eye questions. We are short of time, but please introduce yourself and address the question to a specific person. Who's the first? Maybe you.
Ray Wojcik from KC Consulting. I agree with Mariana about...
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I agree with Mariana about the... Is he first? I'm sorry.
No, you can continue.
I agree with Mariana about the weak deterrence posture after 2008 absolutely shaped the conditions for Putin. I agree with the general about the Black Sea strategy, and I agree with the Admiral about Ukraine will win. My question is on the deterrence front going forward, what can NATO do on the Black Sea, reference standing NATO maritime groups? There's only 2 that can do patrolling, and it allowed the Black Sea over these years to be exposed or not have the presence it needed. So what would you say about the standing NATO maritime groups? How can we increase that and have more deterrence going ahead? Thanks.
Maybe we'll collect some more questions. Your question is?
Thank you very much. I am a member of Turkish Parliament. I am a diplomat by profession. Now I chair Turkish delegation in the Council of Europe. So I wish there was a Turkish admiral also here who had participated in the negotiation of this grain corridor deal or who is observing now the implementation. But anyhow, let me try to fill the gap. First of all, Turkish cooperation, coordination, Turkish aid with Ukraine didn't start after 24th of February. It started long years ago to help Ukraine develop its capacity to defend. My problem is here, EU colleagues especially, they are trying to design a strategy in the Black Sea without Turkey, or just criticizing Turkey in the Council of Europe. Or they are trying to design a Syria, we have 900 kilometers, without Turkey. And they ask us, why don't you follow the EU sanctions? The answer is simple, because we are not members, you don't consult us on any issue, you are not allowed us to get involved in any decision shaping. This was the same in 90s. We couldn't design a proper strategy on getting the hydrocarbon resource of Central Asia and Caspian to Europe, independent of Russia. At that time also EU countries rejected it. We could only make one pipeline. The question is, within the strategy we should design from now on, should we take into consideration the taking energy resources of the area in Kazakhstan without Black Sea and without Russia through pipelines from Turkey? Thank you.
And the last question, shortly please.
Wojciech Łuczak, defense analyst, Warsaw, Poland. Mariana said about the submarine. I would say that the Russians are going to turn Crimea into unsinkable aircraft carrier somewhere in the Black Sea. And this tactics of the Russians is very straightforward, to cut Ukraine from the Black Sea and to control Black Sea. And this is, Admiral, this is not Ukrainian business, this is our own business. If the Russians will succeed in such a strategy in Black Sea, what will be, what is the tactics on eventual cutting, let's say, predictable democratic world from the Black Sea area? Thank you very much.
So we have 3 questions here. Who is going to answer? We are limited of time.
Yeah, many of the questions to NATO, I guess. The energy question I'm not going to answer. I think in general Turkey is a good ally. Turkey is playing an important role. Mariana said it as well with regard to the grain deal and with the Montreal and the Strait. So I think there is. I don't think there's criticism there in NATO on the position of Turkey. With regard to the Black Sea and being cut off, and whether it's an aircraft carrier or a submarine, Crimea, I think it is interesting because the Russians actually have no maritime superiority in the Black Sea at the moment. It is interesting because everybody thinks that, but it's not. And Ukraine has been very successful to actually not only sink the Moskva, but also to attack the naval air station in Crimea. And so the Russians are not effective as they want to be. And the same applies for air superiority. They don't have that at the moment. That is the reason why the operation actually is not successful at all. So we have to be careful to talk about the Russians always as if they are 11 feet tall, because they're not. They have actually not achieved any of their strategic goals in Ukraine, so strategically they have lost this war already. And of course it is up to, because of the bravery of the Ukrainian people and the armed forces, that they are successful on the ground. And that is fantastic, with the help of many. But, I mean, the Russians are not successful at all. And the discussion, as we had before, is what does it mean if they are cornered in a way to a point where they start doing unpredictable or things that are unthinkable. And that is, of course, something we will have to think about. We will not talk about what the outcome of that discussion is until we see it happening. But that is part of warfare. You have to prepare for the worst, and then you don't talk about it. The only thing, as I said before, the alliance is talking to the Russians, as Jake Sullivan did from the United States when it came to the response to any attack from the Russians in the nuclear. And I think that is a very strong signal coming from the US on behalf of the alliance.
I'm afraid we are out of the schedule right now, so we need to finish. The only thing I can add is that the Turkish minister was supposed to be here, but he is not, apparently. It's a pity. This concludes the panel. Thank you. Thank you to all participants and spectators. Thank you very much.
Well, NATO and the Black Sea region and Ukraine, these topics, these words have popped up again and again and again over the past couple of days. It's obvious that there's deep concern about what's happening in that region and what will be happening there moving forward. Right now, we're going to come back off the water, as it were, onto the land in Ukraine and address a question that is very difficult, it must be said. We're talking about war atrocities being committed in Ukraine, what they mean, how prosecution of those atrocities will proceed. It's again a topic that I deal with as a television news anchor covering Ukraine a lot. But what we've got right now is a high-level conversation on that topic, one-to-one, involving the responsibility of Russia for mass atrocities committed in Ukraine. And we've got just the right person to host that. A good friend of mine, a very accomplished moderator. You see him on world stages everywhere. My good friend, Ali Aslan.
Thank you so much, Terry, indeed, for this kind introduction. It's wonderful to see you up on stage doing your masterful work as MC. And yes, this is indeed a very crucial, very timely discussion we're going to have here right now. I couldn't be more delighted to be joined when we talk about war crimes committed by Russia, to talk about the one person who is at the forefront of this fight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Ukrainian Prosecutor General Andrei Kostin is here with us. Please give him a hand. Andrikos, and obviously the aim on your part, on the part of the international community, is to hold Russia accountable for its war crimes against Ukrainian people. Before we go into detail, perhaps you can give a very quick overview over what is the nature of Russian crimes committed and what sort of crimes are you actually investigating?
Thank you, Ali. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I start my introductory remarks, I would like to thank government of Poland and Polish people for their invaluable assistance and support from the very first day of Russian aggression. Coming back to a question, currently my office is investigating 3 types of international crimes: the crime of aggression, the war crimes, and the crime of genocide. Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of my country is clear violation of the UN Charter's prohibition of the use of force against territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. This act requires adequate response, entailing Russia's state responsibility as well as individual criminal liability of its political and military leadership. We have already identified more than 600 suspects for the crime of aggression. As of now, we have around 37,000 registered incidents of war crimes, with death toll among civilian population amounting to 7,500, including 418 children. Number of wounded exceeds 10,000. And these numbers are incomplete, as we are unable to have a whole picture of the situation due to ongoing hostilities and lack of access to occupied territories of Ukraine. Since the very first day of this brutal war, we have witnessed Russia's deliberate targeting of civilian population and civilian objects in urban settings, along with intentional starvation of civilians in besieged cities. Undoubtedly, acts of Russian soldiers, such intentional killing of civilians or detainees, torture and mutilation, rape and other sexual violence, acts of terror and intimidation, forced displacement and pillage amount to war crimes. We all remember bombing of Mariupol maternity hospital and drama theater, shelling of Kramatorsk railway station, mass killings and torture in towns of Kyiv region, or the very recent missile attack in Zaporizhia, killing 25 civilians. Last night, city of Bila Tserkva has been attacked through kamikaze drones. As of now, we have identified more than 170 suspects and successfully convicted 10 war criminals. These illegal acts have nothing to do with the combatants' engagement in armed conflicts. This brings me to the crime of genocide. Since 24th of February, we have heard loud and clear how Kremlin's leadership incited Russian army to carry out the Ukrainization process. Step by step, rhetoric became more aggressive, and the first signs of attacking Ukrainians as a group appeared. We all remember atrocities committed in Bucha and Irpin. With the recent liberation of occupied territories in eastern and southern parts of the country, we have been witnessing the manifest pattern of similar conduct. In Izium, more than 440 graves were found at a mass burial site in the woods at the edge of liberated city. While killing of large number of groups may be the most direct means of destroying a group, persecution can also be committed by other acts that does not have immediate result, such as practices of forced deportations and confinement to filtration camps practiced by Russian Federation. Deliberate policy of forced deportation of Ukrainian children and initiation of adoption processes in Russia is particularly alarming. We have already identified up to 7,000 children victims of this policy in course of the ongoing criminal proceedings, whereas potential number are tenfold, if not more. We all know that forcibly transferring children of one group to another group is a classical example of genocide.
Thank you so much for giving us this overview. And I want to pick up on some of the numbers that you have shared with us. You said you have so far 37,000 documented war crimes, but so far only 170 individuals have been charged as suspects. And if I understand, only about 25, 30 people have been indicted, 10 convicted, if I'm not mistaken. But those are still relatively small numbers compared to the crimes and the numbers of documented war crimes we're looking at. Why is it so hard? So what are some of the main challenges that you're encountering here?
The main challenges in our investigations are, first of all, we have lack of access to occupied territories. And often with recapturing of the occupied regions, we might discover that certain piece of evidence is already distorted, or simply the witnesses are unavailable due to massive displacement, forcibly deported or fled the territory due to war. Some crimes are of a sensitive nature, for example, conflict-related sexual violence. It becomes extremely difficult to seek testimony from survivors. In general, coming forward and talking of the atrocities committed or horrors witnessed is quite traumatic for people. Therefore, we are being very cautious in our efforts and sensitive to the needs of victims and survivors. Coming back to these figures, we have two sources of registering of the incidents of war crimes. First of all, it's shelling and bombing of civil infrastructure. It could be apartments, it could be homes, it could be other civil infrastructure. So there is a fact, and we register it as a fact of war crime, as an incident of war crime. The others, we have the other source are reports of people. So people can claim that their property was destroyed due to attack of the aggressor. And we, of course, register such cases. So, for instance, if it's multi-story buildings and all of the flats have lost their windows, then many people then, at some time, that come and register that their property was damaged or their property was completely destroyed. And there is also one interesting situation, that it can happen that the same fact of war crimes committed, for instance, destroying of property, could be reported by different members of the same family, for instance, who fled and who report these in weeks or months after that. So that is why we are now, with our international partners, we are now preparing some IT solution to find this duplication and to reduce this number, so that we will be concentrated on specific facts.
So the overlapping of numbers then ought to be
Yes, we understand
reduced.
that this exists. Yes.
It's interesting enough that you, if I understand correctly, you and President Zelensky, of course, you are calling for a special tribunal for the crime of aggression. You think that it is the best way to find injustice against Russia. This is not unprecedented, of course. You've had the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia back in the early 90s. Why do you think that such a special tribunal here for the crime of aggression is needed?
First of all, we all understand that crime of aggression was the first crime committed by Russian Federation, because the aggression was the first. We name it as the mother of all other war crimes. There would be no other war crimes if aggression was not committed. Due to legal constraints, the crime of aggression could not be prosecuted and tried by the International Criminal Court. This is understandable for everyone. Then, everyone understands that act of aggression was committed, and the whole civilized world supported this on the level of General Assembly already, and also supported this fact on the level of Council of Europe or OSCE. So we have this fact already. This is no doubt that the crime of aggression was committed. Then we all understand that this aggression is another attempt of Putin's regime to ruin the basics of international law. So if this crime was committed, we need it to be punished. And the only legal way to punish this crime is to have a special tribunal. Of course, the easiest legal way to make it
was via the resolution of the Security Council of UN. But we all understand that at least one permanent member of the Security Council will impose veto on this decision. That's why we're seeking the support of General Assembly, because every Ukrainian, it's not only about the political position of the president and political leadership of Ukraine. Every Ukrainian wants this tribunal. I will mention historically, our people gave name to this tribunal, and the first name for tribunal was Kharkiv Tribunal. When at the end of February, Kharkiv multi-storied buildings where people live, apartment buildings, were destroyed by Russian missiles, which they deliberately target these buildings. Then, if you remember, the people changed the name into Bucha Tribunal, Mariupol Tribunal. So this is about Ukrainian nation. They want this to be happen.
They want this to happen, and indeed, I see a rationale for wanting a special tribunal here, a new institution, as a matter of fact, that, as you say, would have to be approved by the UN General Assembly. There's some scholars out there, well, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, could also go after Russia for war crimes. As a matter of fact, the ICC